The night my mother raised her glass and announced, "Your sister is successful and responsible, unlike you." She had no idea she was praising a lie. I'd been paying for $3,500 a month, every month, for 2 years. And when I finally said, "Then you won't need my money anymore," the entire table went silent. So, how did I become the irresponsible daughter while secretly keeping the golden child afloat? My name is Megan. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a project coordinator at a mid-size marketing firm, the kind of job that doesn't sound glamorous at family dinners, but pays my rent, keeps my lights on, and gives me just enough stability to breathe. And tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of the moment my family's perfect image finally cracked, starting with a dinner that was supposed to be nice, and ending with a single sentence that shattered everything. It was one of those evenings my mother loved to orchestrate: a clean table, warm lighting, the good plates that only came out when she wanted the family to look like we belonged in a holiday commercial. My father sat at the head of the table, quiet as usual, already halfway lost in his phone. And across from me sat my older sister, Julia, the golden child. Julia had that kind of confidence that felt inherited, like she'd been handed it along with her birth certificate. She wore a cream-colored blouse that looked expensive in a way you couldn't quite name, and her hair fell in those effortless waves people pay a stylist to create. She smiled often, not because she was happy, but because she knew she was being watched. And she loved being watched. My mother adored her, not in a normal way, in a way that felt like worship. Growing up, Julia wasn't just my sister. She was the family's proof that we were doing something right. Her grades were a trophy. Her college acceptance was a victory for everyone. Her first job was something my mother told strangers about in grocery store lines. And me, I was the one my mother described with softer words. Megan is sweet. Megan is trying. Megan is different. Different. Like that was a polite word for disappointing. That night, my mother had cooked roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans with almonds, my father's favorite. She was in a good mood, the kind where she talks louder and laughs too easily, because she's enjoying the feeling of control. At first, it was normal. My father asked about work in his usual half-interested way. Julia talked about clients and meetings, using corporate words like they were accessories. My mother nodded proudly, like every sentence was a medal being pinned onto Julia's chest. I tried to stay quiet. That's what I'd learned to do in my family, take up as little space as possible so I wouldn't give anyone an excuse to compare me. But then, halfway through dinner, my mother stood up. She actually stood up. She lifted her wine glass and smiled like she was about to make a toast at a wedding. "I just want to say," she began, looking directly at Julia, "how proud I am of you." Julia tilted her head, pretending to be humble, the way she always did when she knew praise was coming. "You've always been so successful," my mother continued, "so responsible. You've never needed anyone to help you." Then my mother's eyes shifted to me, and I felt my stomach drop, because I knew what was coming. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile people use when they think they're being honest and don't care if it hurts. "Unlike you, Megan," she said. The room went quiet like someone had muted reality. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I stared at my mother, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, to realize what she'd just done. But she didn't. She kept going. "You see," she said, her voice light, almost cheerful, "some people know how to stand on their own 2 feet. Julia has never been the kind of girl who leans on anyone. She doesn't need help from anyone." I felt my cheeks burn. Not because I was embarrassed, because I was furious, because no one at that table knew the truth. For the past 2 years, I had been wiring $3,500 into Julia's account every single month. Not once, not a few times, not when she needed it. Every month, on the same day, like a bill, like a subscription, like Julia's lifestyle was something I was obligated to keep renewing. I'd been doing it quietly, without telling my parents, because Julia begged me not to. "Mom and Dad can't know," she'd said the first time. They'll freak out. They'll judge me. They'll think I failed. And I'd believed her. I'd believed that protecting her secret was the loving thing to do. I'd told myself I was being a good sister. But sitting there, listening to my mother praise her independence while she lived off my paycheck, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't hurt. It was something sharper, something colder. My mother's toast ended with a laugh. Julia smiled, soaking it in like sunshine. My father finally looked up, nodded once, and went back to his plate. And I realized none of them were going to stop. No one was going to correct the story. Not Julia, not my parents, not anyone. Because the lie was too comfortable for them. Julia got to be the success story. My mother got to feel like she'd raised a star. My father got to sit in peace and pretend everything was fine. And I got to sit there and swallow my anger like it was part of the meal. Except I couldn't. Not anymore. My hands were trembling under the table. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. And for a second, I tried to talk myself out of it. Don't ruin dinner. Don't cause drama. Don't be the difficult one again. But then my mother said it. The sentence that finally snapped something in me. You should really learn from your sister Megan, she said, smiling like she was giving me advice. She doesn't need help from anyone. That was it. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor, and the sound made everyone look at me. Julia's smile faltered. My mother blinked in surprise, like I'd broken a rule. I forced a smile that felt like glass cutting my gums. You're right, Mom, I said. My voice was calm, too calm. I looked directly at Julia. It's perfect that she doesn't need help from anyone. Julia's eyes narrowed slightly, like she sensed something dangerous. I took a slow breath, and then I dropped the bomb I'd been too scared to even imagine before that moment. So, I said, my $3,500 monthly transfers end today. The color drained from Julia's face so fast it was almost frightening. My mother's smile collapsed. My father froze. For the first time in years, all three of them were staring at me like I mattered. Julia's lips parted, but no sound came out. My mother looked between us, confused. What are you talking about? She demanded. I didn't answer her right away. I just watched Julia, watched her perfect composure crack, watched her swallow hard, watched her fingers tighten around her wine glass like she needed something to hold on to. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Julia wasn't just shocked. She was terrified, because the truth was about to come out, and she knew she couldn't stop it. Not anymore. My mother set her glass down slowly. Megan, she said, her voice sharper now, explain yourself. I leaned forward slightly, still looking at Julia. I've been sending Julia money, I said, each word deliberate. Every month. For 2 years. My father's eyebrows lifted. Julia finally found her voice, thin and strained. Megan, she whispered, warning me. But I didn't stop. $3,500, I continued. Not a little help, not a favor. A full transfer, like rent. My mother stared at Julia as if she'd never seen her before. Is that true? She asked. Julia's face went rigid. She didn't answer, and the silence that followed felt louder than any argument. Because in that silence, my mother's toast, her proud little speech about independence, started to rot in the air. My father's chair creaked as he shifted. My mother's lips trembled. And Julia looked at me like I'd just lit a match in a room full of gasoline. I could have stopped there. I could have softened it. I could have said, it's fine. It's not a big deal. The way I always did. But I didn't. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet sister trying to keep the peace. I was the one holding the truth. And I was done paying for their fantasy. If you want to know what happened after that dinner, how my sister's perfect image finally collapsed, how my parents reacted when they realized who had really been carrying this family, and how one lie turned into a war that forced everyone to choose a side, stay with me. Because that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I didn't remember the drive home. I remembered fragments, streetlights streaking across my windshield, the tight ache in my jaw from clenching my teeth, the way my hands kept slipping on the steering wheel because my palms were sweating. My mother's voice played on loop in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. Successful and responsible, unlike you. I kept hearing it, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. It was the same message my family had been feeding me my whole life, just dressed up in nicer words. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my chest felt tight, like something heavy had been sitting there for years and had suddenly shifted. I climbed the stairs to my unit on autopilot. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and the moment it clicked shut behind me, I exhaled so hard it almost sounded like a sob. The silence of my apartment hit me in a way it never had before. No voices, no clinking plates, no fake laughter, no one watching me. Just me. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at them for a second like I didn't recognize my own life. Then I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and did the thing I'd been avoiding for months. I scrolled. Transfer after transfer after transfer. Same amount, same name, same date. It looked less like generosity and more like a crime scene. I watched my thumb flick up the screen, and every time the numbers repeated, something inside me tightened. 3,500美元. 2 years. 24 months. I didn't need to do the math to feel the weight of it. I had felt it every time I said no to myself. No to vacations. No to new clothes. No to a better apartment. No to taking a risk at work. No to breathing. I stood in my kitchen, staring at those transfers, and I felt this strange mix of rage and grief. Rage at Julia. Rage at my parents. Rage at myself. But grief was the worst part, because grief meant I was finally admitting the truth. I hadn't been helping my sister. I'd been funding her lie. And worse than that, I'd been helping my family keep loving her more than me. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the one I'd bought secondhand because I told myself it was temporary, and I laughed once. It came out sharp and bitter, like it didn't belong to me. I'm 28. I have a stable career. I pay my own bills. I file my taxes on time. I've never asked my parents for money since I moved out, and yet somehow, I'm the irresponsible one. Make it make sense. For a moment, I thought about calling my best friend. I thought about dumping all of this into someone else's ears, letting them hold the weight with me. But then I pictured the look on Julia's face at dinner. That split second when her eyes went wide, when her lips parted and nothing came out. That wasn't just surprise. That was panic. And panic meant there was more. There was always more with Julia. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my phone. My apartment was modest, clean, organized, but nothing like the world Julia presented online. No marble countertops. No designer candles. No perfect throw pillows arranged like a magazine spread. Just reality. The kind of reality I'd been living while paying for her fantasy. I stared at my ceiling and let the memories come, one after another, like they'd been waiting for permission. Birthday parties where my achievements were mentioned quickly, like a footnote before the conversation swung back to Julia. Parent-teacher conferences where my grades were fine, but Julia's were brilliant. Family gatherings where my mother introduced Julia with pride and introduced me with explanation. This is Julia. She works in corporate. And this is Megan. She's still figuring things out. Even when I had been paying my own rent since I was 22. Even when I'd been working full-time. Even when I'd been quietly transferring thousands of dollars to the sister who was supposedly standing on her own 2 feet. I thought about the first time Julia asked. It had been a Sunday night. I remembered because I was in sweatpants, folding laundry, when my phone rang. She sounded breathless, like she'd been crying. "Megan," she whispered, "I need you." The words hit me like an emergency alarm. Julia didn't ask for help often, at least not directly. She always played the role of the confident older sister. So, when she cracked, I panicked. "What happened?" I asked. And she told me she'd lost a job, that it wasn't her fault, that the industry was brutal, that she was too talented for the small-minded people she worked with. She said she had rent due. She said she just needed a little cushion until she landed the next big thing. She promised it would be temporary. And I said, yes. Not because I could afford it. Not really. But because for once, I wanted to feel needed. I wanted to feel like I mattered. I wanted to feel like I was more than the less impressive daughter. And I thought, maybe if I helped Julia, my parents would finally look at me differently. Maybe they'd see me as generous, reliable, responsible. Maybe they'd stop treating me like the family's backup plan. I didn't realize back then that helping Julia wouldn't earn me love. It would just make me useful. The transfers started small at first. A couple hundred here, 1,000 there. Then it turned into a pattern. Megan, can you do $2,000 this month? I'll pay you back when my client pays. Megan, I just need one more month. I'm so close. Megan, you know I'd do it for you. Then one day she said, almost casually, it's easier if we just make it consistent, like a standing transfer. $3,500. I remember staring at my phone after she said it, my stomach twisting. Julia, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that's a lot. And she laughed. Not a mean laugh, a light laugh, the kind that makes you feel silly for questioning her. It's fine, she said. You're stable. You always have everything under control. And I'm your sister. You're not going to let me drown, right? And I didn't, because drowning is what she made it sound like. Because she knew exactly which part of me to touch the part that was desperate to be a good daughter, a good sister, a good person. So I set up the transfer, every month, like clockwork. And here's the part that still makes my throat tighten when I think about it. Julia didn't just take the money. She made me feel like I was lucky to be allowed to help. She made me feel like it was my role, like I was supposed to support her greatness. I thought back to the way my parents talked about her. When my mother described Julia's life, it sounded like a brochure. Big firm, fast-track promotion, important clients, high pressure, high reward. And whenever I asked Julia directly, she was always vague. You wouldn't understand corporate politics, she'd say with a smile. Or, it's complicated, but it pays well. And then, almost immediately, she'd pivot. By the way, can you send the transfer a little earlier this month? I used to accept that vagueness because I didn't want to seem jealous. I didn't want to seem suspicious. I didn't want to be the little sister who couldn't just be happy for her. But now, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something that made my stomach drop. If Julia was so successful, why did she need me? If she was so responsible, why was she relying on a secret transfer like oxygen? And why did she look like I'd ripped the floor out from under her when I ended it? I got up and walked to my living room window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Julia was probably in her expensive apartment, scrolling through her phone, figuring out how to spin tonight into a story where she was still the victim. Because that's what she did. She didn't just lie. She performed. And my family applauded. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass and felt the truth settle in my chest like a stone. My parents didn't know who Julia really was anymore. They knew the version she sold them. The polished version. The successful version. The version that made them feel proud. And I had helped keep that version alive. I had been the invisible stagehand behind her spotlight, holding up the set so the audience wouldn't see it wobble. But the dinner table had changed something. My mother's toast had ripped the blindfold off. Because if Julia truly didn't need help, then my money shouldn't matter. Yet the moment I said the transfers were ending, she looked like her entire world was about to collapse. That meant there was a bigger truth underneath. A truth I hadn't been brave enough to ask for, and now I couldn't unsee it. I went back to my phone and opened Julia's social media, something I almost never did without guilt. Her feed was a highlight reel. Rooftop bars. Weekend trips. A handbag so expensive I could have paid off my credit card with it. A caption that said, "Hard work pays off." I stared at that caption until my vision blurred, because I knew exactly whose hard work had paid for it. Mine. And suddenly, I wasn't just angry. I was done. Done being the quiet ATM. Done being the sister who swallowed resentment and called it love. Done being compared to a lie I'd been financing. I needed answers. And I needed them from someone who wasn't part of our family's little theater. Someone who had seen Julia's life without my mother, narrating it like a fairy tale. My mind landed on one name. A guy Julia went to college with. Someone she'd mentioned a few times over the years. Someone who, unlike my parents, didn't have a reason to protect her image. My heart started pounding again, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was from resolve. I opened my contacts, found his name, and stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed, "Hey, it's Megan. I need to ask you something about Julia. Do you have time to talk?" I hovered over the send button, my finger trembling slightly, because I knew that once I pressed it, I couldn't go back. Once I started digging, I might uncover something ugly, something that would change everything. But then I remembered my mother's toast, remembered the way Julia smiled, remembered the way my father didn't even look up, and I pressed send. The message delivered, and as I stared at the screen, waiting for his reply, one thought echoed through me with terrifying clarity. If Julia's whole life was built on a lie, then I had been paying for my own humiliation, and I was about to find out exactly how deep it went. His reply came faster than I expected. "Hey, Megan. Wow, it's been a while. Sure, what's going on? Want to grab coffee and catch up?" My stomach tightened the moment I read it, because this wasn't catching up. This was me walking into a conversation that could change everything I thought I knew about my sister, and maybe everything I thought I knew about my family. Still, I typed back a simple, "Sure, tomorrow works." The next day, I arrived early. I chose a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, the kind of place where the lighting was soft and the music was low enough that no one paid attention to other people's conversations. I sat in a corner booth with my back against the wall, the way you do when you're anxious and want to see everything coming. My hands were wrapped around a coffee I didn't want. The cup was warm, but it didn't calm me. My chest felt too tight, like I'd swallowed a stone and it was pressing against my ribs. I kept checking the door, not because I was excited to see him, but because every second I waited felt like the universe giving me one last chance to back out. I could still walk away. I could still pretend I didn't need to know. I could still go back to being the quiet sister who paid in silence. But then I pictured Julia's face at dinner, the way the color drained out of it when I said the transfers were ending, and I knew I was already past the point of no return. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and he walked in. He looked older than I remembered, in a normal way, a little more tired around the eyes. He scanned the room, spotted me, and waved with an easy smile like this was some casual reunion. "Hey," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Megan, right? Wow. It really has been a while." "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. "It has." We did the polite small talk for a few minutes. He asked about work. I asked about his. He mentioned moving, a new job, the usual life updates people exchange when they haven't seen each other in years. But I barely heard any of it. My mind kept circling back to one thing: Julia, the polished version my parents worshipped, the version I'd been funding, the version I was about to put on trial. Finally, he paused mid-sentence and tilted his head slightly. "So, what's this really about?" he asked gently. "You sounded serious in your message." My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. I took a breath. "I need to ask you about my sister," I said. His eyebrows lifted. "Julia?" "Yes," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I intended. "My family keeps talking about her like she's some kind of miracle. Like she's got this amazing corporate job, big clients, promotion track, all of it." He nodded slowly, listening. I hesitated, and for a second I almost softened it, almost tried to make it sound less dramatic. But I was done minimizing my own reality. So I said it plainly. "I've been sending her $3,500 a month," I said. "Every month, for 2 years." The words hung between us like smoke. His face changed instantly. His eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly. "You've been sending her what?" he asked, leaning forward like he hadn't heard me correctly. $3,500, I repeated, feeling my throat tighten. "Every month." He let out a low whistle and leaned back, shaking his head. "Megan, I knew you helped her sometimes," he said slowly. "She mentioned it once or twice, but I thought she meant like a couple hundred here and there. Not..." He trailed off, looking genuinely stunned. That's a lot of money, he added, like he needed to say it out loud to make it real. A cold, familiar anger crept up my spine. I know, I said. That's why I'm sitting here, because none of it makes sense. He stared at me for a long moment, then asked carefully, Does your family know? No, I said. They think she's completely independent. They think she's successful. They think she's responsible. The irony in my voice must have been obvious, because he winced slightly. And she isn't? He asked. I swallowed. That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. Is she actually working at that big firm she tells my parents about? Is she actually in that position? Or is she lying? He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He didn't answer right away. And that pause, the hesitation, hit me harder than any words. Because hesitation meant there was something he didn't want to say. Something messy. Something real. Finally, he looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy, part discomfort. Last I knew, he began carefully, she wasn't at any big firm. My heart dropped so fast, I felt dizzy. What? I whispered. He nodded, as if he'd already decided there was no gentle way to deliver it. She had a job a while ago, he said, but she got fired, or let go. She told people it was restructuring, but it didn't sound like that. After that, she was doing freelance stuff. Consulting, she called it. Between offers. The cafe noise faded into a dull hum. Fired. Freelance. Between offers. Those words hit my brain like a hammer. I stared at him, barely blinking. She told my parents she was fast-tracked for management, I said, my voice thin. She told them she was handling big clients. He shook his head slowly. I never heard anything like that, he said. Honestly, it always felt like she was trying to keep up an image. He said it quietly, like he was afraid the word image might explode. An image, I repeated. He nodded again. Designer outfits, he said. Expensive brunches, weekend trips. She always looked like she was thriving. My mind flashed through Julia's Instagram posts. The rooftop bars, the beach photos, the bags, the captions about hard work and success. And then my banking app. Transfer after transfer. It was like two movies playing over each other. And I was the one paying for the special effects. I forced myself to breathe. Did she ever talk about me? I asked. My voice was sharper now, the question slipping out before I could stop it. His shoulders tensed slightly. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. Look, he started. I don't want to stir drama. I let out a short laugh that didn't sound like humor. Please, I said. I'm already drowning in it. Just tell me. He exhaled. She complained sometimes, he admitted. Not all the time. But, yeah, she said your parents were always on her back, that you were controlling with money. My chest tightened. Controlling, I repeated. He nodded. She said you liked to hold it over her, he continued. That you were jealous, that you wanted her to feel like a failure. For a moment, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Jealous, controlling, holding it over her. I stared at him like the air had been sucked out of the cafe. All this time, while I was sending her thousands of dollars, while I was skipping things I wanted, while I was telling myself I was being a good sister, she was telling people I was the villain. A bitter laugh escaped me, sharp and ugly. So let me get this straight, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I work my ass off. I wire her money every month. I keep her secret so our parents don't worry. And she tells people I'm jealous and controlling? He looked uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. I'm not saying she was right, he said quickly. I'm just telling you what I heard. From the outside, it always looked like she was living this perfect, polished life. If you hadn't told me about the money, I would have never guessed she needed help at all. Something inside me hardened, because that was the point. Julia didn't just take my money. She used it to buy herself applause. She used it to build a story where she was still the star. And then she used that story to make me look small. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app again, scrolled, and turned the screen toward him. This, I said quietly, is what I've been doing. He leaned in, eyes scanning the long list of transfers. His expression shifted from shock to something darker. Megan, he said slowly. That's messed up. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Yeah, I said. It is. He sat back, shaking his head. She shouldn't be taking advantage of you like that, he said. And lying on top of it, that's not okay. I stared out the cafe window for a moment, watching people walk by with shopping bags and coffee cups, living normal lives. And I wondered how I'd let mine become this. How I'd let my sister turn me into her secret sponsor while she played the role of the successful golden child. How I'd let my parents worship her without ever asking one simple question. If she's doing so well, why does she need Megan's money? But the truth was, I already knew the answer. They never asked because they didn't want to know. They liked the story. And Julia liked being the heroine. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Not because it felt good, but because it was real. He looked at me with concern. What are you going to do? He asked. I stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time since the dinner, my thoughts weren't spinning. They were settling, forming into something clear, something sharp, something final. I'm going to stop letting her write the story, I said quietly. I walked out of the cafe with my heart pounding, but it wasn't the same kind of pounding as before. Before, it was fear. Now, it was resolve. On the way home, I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt angry in a clean, focused way. The kind of anger that doesn't burn you from the inside. The kind that turns into action. By the time I reached my apartment, I already knew what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to argue with Julia about feelings. I wasn't going to beg her for honesty. I wasn't going to ask my parents to stop comparing us. I was going to walk straight into her perfectly curated world with proof. Hard proof. And I was going to force the truth into the light so brightly that no one could pretend they didn't see it. Because if Julia wanted to keep living a lie, fine. But she was going to do it without my money. And without my silence. And possibly, the disprofit and apport today, by the time I got home from the cafe, my questions had stopped being questions. They were answers. Not the kind that brought peace, more like the kind that landed in your chest and stayed there, heavy and undeniable. I set my keys down on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of my apartment for a long moment, staring at nothing. My sister wasn't between offers. She wasn't on a fast track. She wasn't handling big clients. She was unemployed at best, freelancing at worst, and still living like someone who had a 6-figure salary and a lifestyle budget, and I had been the one paying for it. Worse than that, she'd been telling people I was controlling, jealous, bitter, like I was some pathetic little sister trying to drag her down. I walked into my kitchen, opened my fridge, and stared inside like food might somehow fix what I was feeling. I shut it again. My appetite was gone. I wasn't hungry. I was done. For years, I'd been trained to swallow things, swallow comparisons, swallow disrespect, swallow the ache of being the daughter who always tried and never quite measured up. But something had shifted the night of that toast. And then something else shifted in that cafe. Because now I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being sensitive. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being used. I sat down at my laptop and opened a blank folder on my desktop. I stared at the empty screen, and then I named it something simple, Andulia. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second, and I almost laughed at myself. What was I doing? Building a case file on my own sister? But then I remembered my mother's voice, bright and proud, calling her successful and responsible. And I remembered Julia's smile. That slow, satisfied smile she wore while my mother insulted me. And I remembered the panic in her eyes when I ended the transfers. I wasn't being petty. I was being prepared. I opened my banking app on my phone, logged in, and started downloading statements. 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. The files stacked up quickly, each one another piece of proof that I hadn't been helping her sometimes. I had been financing her entire life. When I finally exported the full transaction history, I stared at the total and felt my stomach twist. I won't even tell you the exact number, because it made me feel sick. It was enough for a down payment, enough to wipe out my student loans, enough to buy myself the kind of freedom I'd been postponing for years. Instead, it had been spent on my sister's image. I leaned back in my chair and let my head fall against it. For a moment, grief hit me again. Not for Julia, for me. For the version of me who believed love meant sacrificing quietly. For the version of me who thought maybe one day my parents would notice. For the version of me who told herself, "It's temporary. She'll fix it. She just needs time." How many times had I said that? How many times had I believed it? I wiped at my eyes, annoyed to realize they were wet. I wasn't crying because I missed her. I was crying because I finally understood how long I'd been betraying myself. Then I opened Julia's social media. I hadn't looked at it closely in months because it always made me feel something I hated admitting: envy. Not of her life because now I knew it was fake, but of the way people celebrated her, the way they believed her, the way they praised her, the way my mother used her as a weapon. I scrolled slowly. There she was, on a rooftop bar with city lights behind her, holding a cocktail like she belonged in that world. There she was on a beach, laughing, hair perfect, captioned, "Sometimes you have to reward yourself after a hard week." There she was holding a designer bag in front of a mirror, captioned, "Manifesting more abundance." I stared at that one for a long time. Abundance, right? Because my bank account had been her manifestation tool. My chest tightened as I started screenshotting. Not one or two. Dozens. Trips, brunches, new outfits, fancy dinners, hotel balconies, shopping bags. I created another folder inside the one I'd made. Social proof. It felt almost surreal, like I was watching a stranger's life. But it wasn't a stranger. It was my sister. And I knew exactly how that life had been paid for. Then I opened a spreadsheet. I'm the kind of person who organizes anxiety into lists. It's how I cope. So I started typing: month, transfer date, amount, total, notes. I added small details I remembered. The month she said she needed money early because a client was late. The month she said she had to pay a business investment. The month she cried and told me she was drowning and I stayed up all night calculating my budget to make it work. The list grew longer and longer. And the more it grew, the clearer something became. Julia didn't just take my money. She timed it. She managed it. She relied on it. She planned her life around it. Like I was her paycheck. And I thought about all the times I'd told myself I was being generous. But generosity is something you choose freely. This wasn't generosity anymore. This was obligation. This was manipulation, dressed up as family. At some point, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. That was new. For the past 2 years, every time Julia called, my body would react before my mind did. My heart would race. My stomach would drop. My brain would scramble to fix it. But now, I felt calm. Not peaceful. Calm. Like the part of me that used to panic had finally gone quiet because it understood something simple. I didn't have to save her. And I didn't have to keep lying for her. I stood up and walked to my bedroom closet. In the back, tucked behind old sweaters and a box of cables, was a folder of paperwork I kept for important things. Lease documents, tax forms, insurance. I pulled it out, opened it, and found my last printed bank statement from months ago. I stared at the paper, at the clean lines of numbers, and suddenly I felt angry again. Not the chaotic anger from dinner, the clean kind. The kind that makes you stand up straighter. Because I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say before. My sister had stolen years of my life. Not literally, not at gunpoint, but emotionally, financially, psychologically. Every plan I postponed was a year she stole. Every night I lay awake, worried about money, was a night she stole. Every time my parents compared me to her while she smiled was a piece of dignity she stole. And she did it while calling me jealous. I walked back to my laptop, printed the transaction history, and watched the pages slide out one by one. The sound of the printer felt like a countdown. When it finished, I picked up the stack and felt its weight in my hands. 2 years of proof. 2 years of silence. 2 years of me being the invisible sister who paid for the golden child's crown. I placed the stack on my kitchen table and stared at it. For a moment, I wondered if I was about to become the villain in my family's story. The jealous sister who couldn't stand to see Julia succeed. The petty one who wanted attention. The dramatic one who ruined dinner. I could already hear my mother's voice. But then I thought about something my mother had never asked me in my entire life. Are you okay? Are you tired? Do you need help? No. The only thing she ever asked was why I wasn't more like Julia. So if I was going to be the villain anyway, I might as well stop playing the role of the silent victim. I pulled out my phone again and opened my notes app. I typed a short list. Boundaries. No more money. No more secrets. No more protecting her image. No more letting my parents use her as a weapon against me. I stared at the words until they felt real. Then I added one more. Truth, even if it hurts. Because I realized something else, something that made my throat tighten. I wasn't just angry at Julia. I was angry at the whole system that had made her. The way my parents built her up so high that she couldn't admit she was struggling. The way they treated me like the backup daughter so naturally that no one even noticed I was the one holding everything together. Julia's lies didn't come from nowhere. They came from a family that rewarded image more than honesty. And I had been the easiest person to exploit because I'd been trained to earn love through sacrifice. But tonight, I wasn't going to sacrifice. Tonight, I was going to see her life with my own eyes. Not the filtered version. Not the one she narrated for my parents. The real one. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I didn't warn her. Because if I gave her time, she'd clean it up. She'd prepare. She'd perform. And I was tired of performances. I grabbed my bag, slid the printed statements inside, and added my phone charger like I was going on a trip. Then I hesitated. For a split second, I stared at myself in the mirror by the door. I looked normal, just a woman in a simple sweater with tired eyes. No glamorous outfit, no expensive accessories, no curated life. But I saw something in my face that I hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. I locked my door, walked down the hallway, and headed to my car. As I drove toward Julia's building, my thoughts were steady. Not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified. But it was a different kind of fear than the one I'd lived with for 2 years. That fear had been about losing her approval, losing my parents' approval, losing my place in the family. This fear was about something else. This fear was about what happens when you finally stop being the quiet sister and start demanding the truth. When I pulled into the street outside Julia's building, I slowed down. Even from the outside, the place looked expensive. Tall glass windows, clean stone entrance, a lobby that screamed money. The kind of building you don't live in if you're just barely getting by. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, staring up at the lights. My heart was pounding again, but my hands weren't shaking. I reached into my bag, touched the edge of the paper stack, and felt the solid proof waiting there. Then I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, I'm not coming here to fight. I'm coming here to see. And I stepped out of the car. Because if Julia's life was really built on lies, then it was time for the truth to walk through her front door. I'm Didden in the Mose of Ming. The lobby alone felt like an insult. Marble floors that reflected the ceiling lights like water. A concierge desk with fresh flowers arranged so perfectly they looked fake. Soft music playing somewhere I couldn't see. Everything about the building whispered the same message. Money lives here. I stood just inside the glass doors for a second, holding my bag tighter than I needed to, and I felt this strange dizziness wash over me. Because for 2 years, Julia had called me crying about how hard it was to survive. For 2 years, she had told me rent was impossible, the industry was brutal, clients were late, opportunities were so close. And yet here she was, living in a building where even the air smelled expensive. I walked up to the concierge desk and gave Julia's name. The man behind the counter barely glanced at me. He tapped something into a tablet and nodded. Go right up, he said. No hesitation, no questions. Like people came to see Julia all the time. Like she belonged here. I stepped into the elevator, pressed her floor, and watched the numbers climb. My heartbeat climbed with them. I told myself I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to destroy her. I was here to see the truth. But the truth was already screaming at me from the walls. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway was quiet and spotless. Thick carpet under my feet, framed art on the walls, soft lighting that made everything look warm and forgiving. I walked to her door and hesitated. For the first time since dinner, I felt a flicker of doubt. What if I was wrong? What if there was an explanation? What if I was about to become exactly what Julia had always painted me as: jealous, bitter, dramatic? My hand hovered near the doorbell. Then I remembered my mother's toast. Successful and responsible, unlike you. And I pressed it. A few seconds passed. Then the door swung open. Julia stood there with a bright, practiced smile already in place, like she'd been waiting for an audience. "Megan," she said, her voice sweet. "Oh my God, I wasn't expecting you." Her eyes flicked over me quickly, my plain sweater, my tired face, my bag clutched too tightly. Then her smile widened. "Come in," she said. "Come in." I stepped inside, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. A candle, something expensive and floral. The second thing that hit me was the apartment itself. It didn't look lived in. It looked staged. A soft cream couch, a glass coffee table, a huge mirror leaning against the wall like it belonged in a fashion shoot. A neat stack of art books that probably had never been opened. A designer throw blanket folded with perfect corners. No clutter. No struggle. No signs of a woman who was supposedly drowning. My jaw tightened. "Nice place," I said, letting the words hang in the air. Julia laughed lightly, like I'd complimented her shoes. "You know," she said, waving a hand, "it's just temporary. I needed something close to the city." Temporary. The same word she'd used for my money. I set my bag down slowly. "Mom and Dad are really proud of you," she added, walking toward the kitchen. I told them about the promotion. Mom was glowing. My stomach turned. Promotion. The lie she'd been feeding them. The lie I'd been financing. "That's great," I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "You must be doing really well." Julia smiled again, and for a second, she looked relieved, like she thought I'd come to apologize for dinner. "Yeah," she said. "It's been crazy. So much responsibility. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I knew exactly how it was. I followed her into the living room and stood beside the coffee table. Julia moved around like she owned the air, like she was in control. But I wasn't here to let her perform. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of papers. I didn't slam them. I didn't throw them. I simply placed them on her pristine glass coffee table. One neat stack. 2 years of truth. Julia's eyes dropped to the papers, and something flickered in her expression. "What's that?" she asked, still smiling, but the smile was thinner now. "Bank statements," I said. Her smile froze. I pulled out my phone next, opened my photos, and set it down beside the papers. "And screenshots," I added. Julia blinked. For a moment, she looked like she didn't understand. Then the color drained from her face. "Megan," she said, her voice lowering, "what are you doing?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The expensive blouse, the perfect hair, the calm posture. And underneath it, I saw something I'd never allowed myself to see before. A person who had been getting away with it for so long she didn't even think she could be caught. "I'm asking you a question," I said. Julia swallowed. "Okay," she said carefully. "Ask." I tapped the top page of the stack. "For 2 years," I said, "I've been sending you $3,500 every month." Julia's eyes darted away. "Yeah," she muttered. "I know." I felt a flash of heat in my chest. The casualness of it, the way she said it like it was nothing. "Mom stood in front of me last night," I continued, "and told me you were successful and responsible, and that you didn't need help from anyone." Julia's jaw tightened. "She didn't know," she said quickly. "I told you she couldn't know." "You didn't just hide it," I said, my voice sharper now. "You let her use it to humiliate me." Julia crossed her arms. "Megan, don't make this into some victim thing," she snapped. "Mom always compares us." "That's not my fault." I stared at her. I couldn't believe how quickly she shifted, how quickly she went from sweet to defensive. How does someone with a six-figure corporate job need $3,500 a month from her little sister? I asked. Explain that to me. Julia's eyes flashed. You wouldn't understand, she said automatically. And the moment she said it, I almost laughed, because that was her favorite line, the one she used when she wanted to shut me down without giving details. I stepped closer. No, I said. This time I will understand. Tell me, are you actually working at that big firm? Julia's lips pressed together. Megan, are you? I repeated. The silence stretched. Julia's shoulders rose and fell with a tight breath. Then she scoffed. This is invasive, she said, her voice sharp. You're coming into my home, dropping papers like you're some investigator. You're going through my posts, my life. Do you hear yourself? I tilted my head. Invasive, I repeated. You mean like taking $84,000 from me and calling it temporary? Julia flinched. I saw it. For the first time, she flinched. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Then her eyes narrowed, and she went for the weapon she always used when she felt cornered. She turned it into my fault. I never asked you to make a big deal out of it, she snapped. You offered. You wanted to feel like the hero. And now you're throwing it in my face because you're bitter. Bitter. The word hit me like a slap. I took a slow breath. You told people I was controlling, I said quietly. Julia froze. What? I met someone yesterday, I continued. Someone you used to know. He told me what you've been saying about me. Julia's face hardened. You went behind my back and talked to people about me? She hissed. Are you kidding me? I didn't blink. You went behind my back and rewrote me as a villain, I said, while I was paying for your rent and your vacations. Julia's nostrils flared. I was drowning, she shouted suddenly. Do you know what it feels like to be the one everyone expects to be perfect? To never be allowed to fail? Mom and Dad built me up like I was some kind of miracle. I couldn't tell them I didn't get the job. I couldn't tell them I got fired. I panicked. There it was. The truth slipped out. I felt my stomach drop. You got fired, I said slowly. Julia's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't meant to say that part. She looked away, jaw clenched. It wasn't like that, she muttered. It was complicated. But it was too late. The mask had cracked. I stepped closer to the coffee table and pointed at the screenshots. Then what is this? I demanded, my voice rising for the first time. Trips, bags, rooftop bars. Captions about hard work paying off. You weren't drowning, Julia. You were floating on my money. Julia's eyes filled with furious tears. You don't get it, she spat. I had to keep up. Everyone was watching me. If I looked like I was struggling, Mom would have torn me apart. Dad would have been disappointed. They would have treated you like they treated me. I cut in. The words came out before I could stop them. Julia went still. For a split second, the room felt like it tilted. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Do you know what it feels like? I continued, voice shaking now. To be the backup daughter? The one who always gets told she's not enough? The one who gets compared to you like I'm a mistake? Julia blinked rapidly, like she was trying not to cry. Then she laughed short and bitter. So, what do you want? She snapped. An apology? A thank you card? Do you want Mom and Dad to throw you a parade because you were such a martyr? I stared at her. The way she twisted it. The way she always twisted it. No, I said, my voice low. I want the truth. Julia's shoulders sagged slightly. I could see her calculating, searching for the version of the story that would save her. But I didn't give her room. Are you working at that firm? I asked again. Yes or no? The silence stretched so long I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, Julia's voice came out quiet. No, she said. I felt something in my chest break and harden at the same time. No, she repeated, louder now, like she was ripping a bandage off. I never worked there. I interviewed. I didn't get it. I told Mom and Dad I did because I thought it would buy me time. And then everything kept falling apart, and the lie just got bigger. My throat tightened. And my money? I asked. Julia looked away. Rent, she muttered. Bills. Some other stuff. Other stuff, I repeated, staring at her. She didn't answer. I didn't need her to. The apartment answered for her. The decor, the building, the lifestyle, the image. I picked up my bag slowly and slung it over my shoulder. Julia's head snapped up. "Wait," she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. "Megan, what are you doing?" I walked toward the door. "What does it look like?" I said. "You can't just cut me off," she whispered, following me. "I can't pay next month's rent without that money." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob and turned back. For the first time, her face wasn't polished. It wasn't confident. It was raw fear. And that fear was the most honest thing I'd seen from her in years. "You can't," she repeated, voice cracking. "I have bills. I have debt. I have people who expect things from me." Debt. That word hit me like another hidden truth. But I didn't ask yet. I just stared at her. "Funny," I said quietly. "That sounds exactly like needing help from someone." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Please," she said, "just one more month. I swear I'm close to something. I'll fix it." How many times had I heard that? How many times had I believed it? I shook my head. "No," I said firmly. "I'm done sacrificing my future so you can keep pretending you've already made it." Julia grabbed my arm. Her fingers were cold. "Megan," she whispered, desperation in her voice now. "Don't tell Mom and Dad. Please. They don't need to know. I'll handle it. I'll figure it out." I pulled my arm back gently but decisively. "That's the problem," I said. "They should have known a long time ago." Julia stared at me, stunned. I opened the door, and as I stepped into the hallway, I felt my heart pounding so hard it almost hurt. But underneath the fear, there was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from hurting someone. The kind that comes from finally stopping. Stopping the payments. Stopping the lies. Stopping the role I'd been forced into. I walked toward the elevator without looking back. Behind me, Julia's voice cracked as she called my name again, like it used to be a spell that could pull me back into the same cycle. But the spell didn't work anymore. And as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me away from her perfect showroom life, one thought settled in my mind with terrifying clarity. Cutting off the money was only the first step. The real storm was still coming. Because my family didn't just worship Julia, they built their whole identity around her. And I was about to hand them the truth like a match in a room full of gasoline. I thought walking out of Julia's apartment would be the hardest part. I thought the confrontation, the papers, the screenshots, the confession was the peak of the storm. But the truth is, that was just the first crack. The real storm didn't start until 2 days later, when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering, already feeling that familiar tension crawl up my spine. My mother didn't call just to chat. Not with me. Not ever. I picked up. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, like nothing had happened at dinner. "Megan," she said, with that tone she used when she wanted to sound kind but wasn't. "You really should be nicer to your sister." I blinked, stunned. "What?" I asked. "She told me you were being difficult," my mother continued, as if she were scolding a teenager for slamming a door. "And I don't like it. Julia is under a lot of pressure at work right now. They're talking about giving her even more responsibility. Big clients, long hours. You could learn something from her dedication." For a second, I couldn't speak. I just held the phone to my ear and listened to her talk about Julia's imaginary job like it was a confirmed fact. Even now, even after that dinner, even after Julia had looked terrified, she was still spinning the story, and my mother was still buying it like it came with a receipt. I looked around my apartment, at the printed bank statements stacked neatly on my table, at the folder on my laptop, at the screenshots I'd saved. The evidence was real, and yet my mother was still living in the fantasy. Something inside me settled into place, cold and clear. This wasn't going to end quietly. Julia wasn't going to come clean on her own. She was going to keep lying until someone forced the truth into the light. And she was going to keep painting me as the villain the entire time. I took a slow breath. "Mom," I said carefully, "how exactly do you think Julia is paying for the lifestyle you're so proud of?" There was a pause. Then my mother laughed softly, like I'd asked the dumbest question in the world. From her job, of course, she said. She's successful, Megan. She doesn't lean on anyone like you always seem to. The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed. Almost. But my voice came out steady. Mom, I said, we need to talk in person. Her tone shifted slightly. Why? What's going on now? Something has been going on for a long time, I said. You just haven't wanted to see it. There was silence on the other end. Then my mother sighed, impatient. Megan, I don't want drama, she said. I stared at the wall, my hand gripping the phone. That depends, I replied, on whether you want the truth or the performance you've been clapping for. Another long pause. Finally, she said, Fine. Come over for dinner tonight. But please, Megan, don't make this into something ugly. I hung up and sat there for a moment, staring at my phone like it was a weapon, because that's what it felt like now. A weapon, not against Julia. Against the lie my family had been living inside for years. I stood up, walked to my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The folder was still there. Kulia. Inside it, the bank statements, the spreadsheet, the screenshots, the timeline, 2 years of proof. I wasn't going to walk into my parents' house and argue about feelings. I wasn't going to get dragged into the usual loop where my mother cried, Julia played victim, and I ended up apologizing for existing. This time, I was bringing facts. Hard, undeniable facts. I spent the next hour organizing everything like I was preparing for court. I labeled files by month. I highlighted the recurring transfers. I created a clean document that showed the total amount sent. I put screenshots of Julia's luxury posts next to the corresponding transfer dates. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I knew my mother. My mother could deny anything that wasn't placed directly in front of her. She could rewrite reality with a single sentence if it made her feel better. So, I wasn't giving her room to rewrite this. When I finished, I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and stared at myself in the mirror by the door. My face looked pale, my eyes looked tired, but there was something else there too. Something firm. I looked like someone who had finally stopped asking for permission to be respected. On the drive to my parents' house, my stomach churned. Not because I doubted the truth, because I knew what truth does to families like mine. Truth doesn't just expose lies. It exposed roles. And in my family, everyone had a role. Julia was the golden child. My mother was the proud narrator. My father was the silent witness. And I was the one who kept things stable from the shadows, then got blamed for any discomfort. If I broke the story, I wasn't just exposing Julia. I was forcing my parents to admit they'd been wrong. And people don't like admitting that, especially not my mother. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always had: neat lawn, warm porch light, curtains drawn. From the outside, it still looked like the safe, normal family home people imagined. I stepped inside, and the smell of dinner hit me immediately. My mother was in the kitchen, moving around with the frantic energy she always had when she was stressed but pretending she wasn't. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, forcing a smile. "She's running late." Of course she was. Julia always ran late, because the world was supposed to wait for her. My father was in the living room, sitting in his usual chair, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly. "Hey," he said, like this was just another Tuesday. I set my bag down carefully. "Hi, Dad." My mother wiped her hands on a towel and glanced toward the front door. "You know how it is with important jobs," she said, half laughing, trying to keep the mood light. I didn't laugh. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I know exactly how it is." We sat at the table, the one where I'd spent my entire childhood learning how to stay quiet. My mother kept fussing, adjusting plates, refilling water, asking my father if he wanted more salt, anything to avoid the tension sitting between us. Then she said, "We should wait until Julia gets here." "No," I said. The word came out calm but firm. My mother froze. "What?" "We don't need her here for this part," I said, meeting her eyes. My father finally looked up from his phone, frowning slightly. "Megan," he said, cautious. "What's going on?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. The movement alone changed the energy in the room. My mother's smile faltered. My father sat up straighter. I placed the laptop on the table and opened it. Then I turned the screen toward them. For the last 2 years, I began, my voice steady, I've been sending Julia $3,500 every month. My father blinked. What? He asked. My mother's face tightened. That can't be right, she said quickly. If anyone was sending anyone money, Julia would be sending it to you. She's the one with the career. I swallowed. No, Mom, I said quietly. It's me. It's my account. My money. I clicked to the transaction history. The list filled the screen, line after line. Same date, same amount, same name. My mother leaned forward, eyes scanning. My father's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. This doesn't make sense, my father muttered. I didn't flinch. It doesn't make sense, I agreed, because she's been lying. My mother shook her head immediately, as if shaking could erase it. No, she said. Julia wouldn't. She would, I interrupted, gently but firmly, and she has. I clicked to the folder of screenshots. The first image was Julia on a beach, smiling with a drink in her hand. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." Next image, a designer bag, mirror selfie. Next, rooftop bar, city lights. Next, weekend getaway. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the screen, his face slowly changing from confusion to something darker. This is, my mother whispered, her voice trembling. This is some kind of misunderstanding. I looked at her. No, I said. This is 2 years of reality. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but not the soft kind. These were the sharp, humiliated tears of someone realizing they'd been bragging about a lie. All those times, she whispered. All those times I told people. Her voice cracked, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Just a heavy, aching sense of inevitability. Because I knew what was coming next. A knock at the door. My mother startled like she'd been saved by an interruption, and rushed to open it. Julia walked in like she owned the house. Perfect outfit, perfect makeup, perfect smile. Sorry I'm late, she said, leaning in to kiss my mother's cheek. Work was insane. Then she saw me. She saw the laptop. She saw my parents' faces, and her smile flickered. Just for a second, but it was enough. What's going on? She asked cautiously. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't soften my voice. We're having a family talk, I said. Julia's eyes narrowed. My mother looked between us, shaking. Your sister is making some claims, she said weakly. She thinks you've been hiding things. Julia's gaze snapped to me. Megan, she said, low and warning. What are you doing? I met her eyes. The same thing you've been doing for years, I said quietly, except I'm finally telling the truth. And in that moment, I watched the golden child realize the spotlight was no longer flattering. It was an interrogation light, and she had nowhere left to hide. Julia stood in the doorway for a beat too long, like her body had walked in on autopilot, but her brain was still trying to catch up. Her eyes flicked from my mother's pale face to my father's rigid posture, to the open laptop on the table, then to me. And for a split second, I saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. The kind of fear you only feel when you realize the story you've been living inside is about to collapse and you're the one who built it. What is this? She asked, forcing a laugh that sounded wrong in her mouth. Why is Megan sitting here like she's running a meeting? My mother's voice came out shaky. Julia, your sister says she's been sending you money. Julia's smile tightened. She's exaggerating, she said quickly. You know how she is. She likes to make things dramatic. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just turned the laptop screen slightly so she could see the transaction history already displayed. Line after line, date after date. 3,000,000 yuan. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low and unnervingly calm. Is it true? He asked. Julia's eyes darted. She did what she always did when she felt cornered. She tried to redirect. Why are we doing this? She snapped, looking at my mother. Why are you letting her attack me like this? I work my ass off. I'm under pressure. And she's jealous. She's always been jealous. Jealous. The word landed like a familiar insult. It was the same one she'd been feeding other people. The same one she'd used to keep herself clean while I looked petty. I felt my hands tighten in my lap, but my voice came out steady. Julia, I said, stop. She froze. My mother looked at me like she'd never heard me speak that way before. My father's eyes stayed locked on Julia. Answer the question, he said again, sharper now. Is it true? Julia swallowed hard. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then her face hardened, and she tried a different tactic. It's not what it looks like, she said. Megan offered. She insisted. She wanted to feel needed. I let out a quiet laugh. It wasn't funny. It was disbelief. You're really going to do this? I asked. You're really going to stand here and pretend you didn't call me every month with a new emergency? Julia's nostrils flared. My mother's hands trembled on the edge of the table. Julia, my mother whispered. Have you been taking money from your sister? Julia's jaw clenched. She started, and then she stopped. Because for the first time in her life, she couldn't charm her way out of it. The proof was right there. She looked down at the screen, looked away. Then she muttered, yes. The word was small, almost swallowed. My mother's breath caught. My father's face went still. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something heavier, like a door closing quietly in my chest. Yes, Julia repeated, louder now, defensive. But it's not like I stole it. She sent it willingly. My father's voice dropped. For 2 years? He asked. Julia lifted her chin. Things were complicated, she said. You don't understand what my industry is like. It's brutal. Rent is insane. Everyone gets help. Megan could afford it. That last sentence came out like an accusation. Like my ability to budget was something she resented. I leaned forward. Could I? I asked softly. Do you have any idea what that money cost me? Julia rolled her eyes, and I felt a flash of rage. Here we go, she muttered. No, I said, my voice rising. Not here we go. You don't get to dismiss it. I looked at my parents, then back at her. You know what it cost me? I continued. The trips I didn't take, the promotions I turned down because I was exhausted from side work, the nights I lay awake panicking over my bank balance, the years of my life I spent shrinking so you could keep looking big. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's mouth tightened. Julia scoffed. Oh my God, she said. You're acting like I held a gun to your head. No, I said. You held guilt. You held our parents' expectations. You held the role you were assigned and used it like a weapon. Julia stood up suddenly, pacing like she couldn't stand being seated under scrutiny. I didn't want to look like a failure, she snapped. Do you think that's easy? You too? She pointed at my parents. You called me special. You called me talented. You told everyone I was destined for more. How was I supposed to admit I didn't get the job? That I got fired? That I was drowning? My mother's face crumpled. Fired? She whispered. Julia froze. She hadn't meant to say that part out loud. I watched her realize it a second too late. My father's head lifted slightly. What do you mean, fired? He asked. Julia's eyes flicked to me, full of hatred now, like I had forced her into this. I didn't, she began. Then she swallowed. I lost a job, she corrected quickly. It wasn't my fault. My father didn't blink. And the big firm? He asked. Julia's shoulders sagged. I interviewed, she muttered. I didn't get it. My mother stared at her like she was seeing a stranger. You told us you were a manager, she whispered. You told us they relied on you. You told us you were handling important clients. Julia's eyes flashed with tears. I was going to get there, she insisted. I just needed time. I just needed a cushion. Everyone needs a cushion. A cushion. That was what she called me. Not a sister. Not a person. A cushion. My mother's voice broke. All those times, she whispered again, shaking her head. All those times I bragged about you. All those times I used you as an example. She turned slowly toward me, eyes glassy. And all along, she said, voice trembling, you were the one actually standing on your own. The words hit me like something I'd been waiting my entire life to hear. Not because I needed praise, but because I needed the truth to finally be said out loud. Julia's face twisted. "You're loving this," she hissed at me. "You're so happy to watch me fall." I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I didn't feel the need to explain. I didn't feel the need to soften. "You fell because you built your life on lies," I said quietly, "not because I finally stopped hiding them." Julia's breath hitched. My father pushed his chair back slightly, the wood scraping the floor. "The money stops," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was final. "From everyone," he continued, looking at Julia. "No more secret transfers. No more pretending. If you want to rebuild, you do it honestly." Julia spun toward him. "You're taking her side?" she demanded, voice rising. "After everything I've done for this family?" My father's eyes narrowed. "What have you done?" he asked. "Besides lie?" The silence that followed was thick. My mother wiped at her face, shaking. "And you," she said, turning to me again, "you should never have had to carry this alone." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I nodded, because if I tried to speak, I knew I'd cry. Julia's eyes burned. She grabbed her bag off the chair. "Fine," she snapped. "Cut me off. See if I care." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She stormed toward the door, heels clicking sharply against the floor like punctuation. Then she stopped and turned back. Her eyes locked on mine. "You think you've won?" she said. "You think this makes you better? But when I'm gone and you're stuck dealing with their expectations, we'll see how long you last." For a moment, I saw it, the real Julia. Not the confident one, not the polished one, the scared one, the one who had been held up by a pedestal for so long she didn't know how to stand without it. The door slammed behind her. My mother flinched like the sound physically hurt. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples, and I sat there with my hands in my lap, heart pounding, staring at the laptop screen, still glowing with proof. Had I gone too far? Was this justice? Or was it revenge? I didn't know, but I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. For the first time in my life, the golden child wasn't untouchable, and I wasn't invisible anymore. The air in the room felt different, like something had finally shifted after years of imbalance. My mother looked at me again, softer now, like she was trying to relearn my face. My father's voice was quieter when he spoke. "We should have known," he said. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't emotional, but they were heavy, and they landed. Because I realized something else then, something that made my chest ache in a new way. This wasn't just Julia's lie. It was a family lie. A lie built on comparisons, on pride, on the need to have a success story. Julia had been the crown, and I had been the foundation. And when the crown cracked, everyone finally saw what it had been sitting on. I stood up slowly, closing my laptop. My mother reached out, almost instinctively, like she wanted to touch my arm, to comfort me. But she hesitated. Because in my family, we didn't comfort me. Not usually. "Are you okay?" she asked finally, her voice small. The question was so unfamiliar it almost didn't feel real. I swallowed hard. "I don't know," I admitted. And that was the truth. Because even though the truth was finally out, I could already feel the next wave coming. Julia wasn't the kind of person who accepted consequences quietly. She wasn't the kind of person who let a story end when she didn't like the ending. And as I drove home later that night, my phone sitting silent in the passenger seat, one thought kept circling in my mind like a warning. The golden child myth had died at that dinner table. But myths don't die peacefully. They explode. And the fallout was only beginning. The fallout wasn't dramatic in the way people expect. There were no screaming matches in the driveway, no family members getting disowned, no tearful apologies that magically fixed everything by sunrise. It was quieter than that. Heavier. The kind of quiet that fills a room and makes you realize how much noise you were using to avoid the truth. The morning after the family meeting, I woke up with my body still tense, like I'd spent the night bracing for a punch that never came. My phone was on my nightstand, silent. No angry texts from Julia, no guilt-tripping messages from my mother, no calls from relatives who'd somehow already heard. Just nothing. For a second, I almost panicked. Because, in my family, silence usually meant someone was building a story behind your back. But as the hours passed, the silence stayed. And I realized something that made my throat tighten. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing anyone else's emotions. I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I wasn't budgeting my life around Julia's emergencies. I got up, made coffee, and opened my banking app out of habit. Then I froze. Because the transfer wasn't scheduled. There was no upcoming payment sitting there like a shadow. No $3,500 waiting to disappear the way it always did. My paycheck had hit the night before, and for the first time in 2 years, it was all still mine. I stared at the numbers for a long moment, my chest tightening with something I couldn't immediately name. Relief, yes, but also guilt. And that guilt made me angry. Because why was I the one feeling guilty? Why did it feel wrong to keep my own money? Why did it feel wrong to stop being used? I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote out a list of things I'd been postponing for years. Pay off my credit card, build an emergency fund, replace my dying laptop, take that professional course I'd always said no to, go on a trip, not to post it, not to prove anything, but to actually rest. The list wasn't extravagant. It was basic, and that's what made it hurt. Because it showed me how small my life had become while I was keeping Julia's fake life inflated. Over the next week, my mother called twice. Not to scold me, not to defend Julia, just to talk. The first time, she sounded awkward, like she didn't know how to speak to me without using Julia as the topic. "How's work?" she asked, clearing her throat. "Fine," I said cautiously. "Busy." A pause. "Are you eating enough?" she asked. The question was so unfamiliar I almost didn't know how to answer. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm okay." She hummed softly, like she didn't quite believe it. Then she said, "I've been thinking." That sentence alone made my stomach twist. Because when my mother thought, it usually ended with me being blamed. But this time, her voice sounded different. "I didn't know," she said. I didn't respond right away, because part of me wanted to say, "You didn't know because you never asked." But another part of me, smaller, more tired, just wanted to let her speak. "I didn't know you were carrying that," she continued. "And I said things. I compared you to. I made you feel like you weren't enough." My throat tightened. I stared at the wall across from me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. My mother almost never apologized. Not sincerely. Not without a but. And hearing it now felt like someone handing me something I'd wanted my whole life, when I was already too bruised to reach for it. "I don't know what to do with that," I admitted. She exhaled shakily. "I don't either," she said. "But I wanted you to hear it." After that call, I sat on my couch for a long time, staring at my hands. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel satisfied. But mostly, I felt tired. Because the truth is, I hadn't wanted to destroy Julia. I'd wanted to stop disappearing. And I'd done that. But the cost was real. My father didn't call much, but a few days later he texted me something simple. "You did the right thing." I should have paid attention sooner. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone down and cried. Not because I was sad, because it was the first time my father had ever said anything that made me feel seen. Meanwhile, Julia vanished. At first, she went silent on social media, which was almost scarier than anything else. No posts, no stories, no captions about hard work. Then, about 2 weeks later, I noticed something. She deleted several photos, the luxury ones, the ones I'd screenshot, the ones that didn't fit her new reality. And that's when the rumors started filtering back to me. Not from her, but from mutual acquaintances. Someone mentioned she'd moved out of her apartment suddenly. Someone else said they'd seen her selling things online. A friend of a friend mentioned she'd been between places. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt satisfying. And part of me did feel vindicated. This was what happened when you stopped paying for someone's lie. But another part of me felt sick. Because even after everything, she was still my sister. And I hated that my heart could hold both anger and concern at the same time. One afternoon at work, my boss called me into her office. I expected a routine check-in. Instead, she smiled and said, "Megan, you've been stepping up in a way we haven't seen before." I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. She leaned forward slightly. "You're sharper," she said. "More focused. You're volunteering for bigger projects. You're taking initiative. It's like you finally have energy." I almost laughed at the irony. Because she was right. For 2 years, I'd been living like I was running a second invisible job, managing Julia's crises, managing my budget around her, managing my parents' expectations. Now, without that weight, my mind felt clearer. My shoulders felt lighter. My life had space again. A week later, I got the promotion. It wasn't some movie moment where everyone clapped. It was just a conversation, a new title, a raise, and my boss saying, "You've been carrying more than your share for a while. We just finally see it clearly now." I walked out of her office feeling dizzy, because my whole life, I'd been the one who was overlooked. And now, suddenly, people were noticing me. Not because I begged for it, not because I performed, but because I finally had room to show up. That night, I celebrated alone. I ordered takeout from my favorite place, sat at my kitchen table, and raised my own glass. Not to Julia, not to my mother, to me, to the girl who'd been called irresponsible while quietly holding everything together, to the woman who finally said no. And for a few weeks, it stayed like that. Quiet, different, almost peaceful. Then one night, my phone lit up with Julia's name. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then the voicemail notification appeared. I didn't play it right away. I just sat there, frozen, like my body remembered the old pattern. Julia calls. Julia cries. Julia asks. I give. But I wasn't that person anymore. I waited until I could breathe, then pressed play. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Not polished, not dramatic. Just tired. "Megan," she whispered. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need help." My stomach tightened. Then she added quickly, like she knew what I was thinking. "Not money, I swear. I'm not asking for money. Can we talk, please?" I listened to it twice. Anger and concern wrestled inside me. Was this another performance? Was this just a new version of manipulation? Or was she finally real? I thought about my boundary list. No more money, no more secrets, no more being her cushion. But talking wasn't money. Talking was human. And as much as I wanted to slam the door forever, I also didn't want the last version of my sister in my head to be the one screaming at me in her showroom apartment. So I texted her one sentence. "We can meet. Public place. No money. No deals." She replied almost immediately. "Okay, thank you." The next day, I chose a quiet cafe. Not the one where I met her friend. A different one. Neutral ground. I arrived early and sat by the window. When Julia walked in, I barely recognized her. No designer blouse. No expensive bag. No perfect hair. She wore a simple sweater, her face bare, her eyes tired in a way that couldn't be filtered. She sat down across from me slowly, like she wasn't sure she deserved the chair. "You look good," she said awkwardly. "You look tired," I replied honestly. She gave a humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it." There was a long silence. Then she spoke. "I moved out of the apartment," she admitted. "I couldn't afford it. I'm renting a room now. I sold some stuff. I still owe money." She swallowed hard. "Mom and Dad won't give me anything unless I come clean and get a job that's beneath me." Beneath her? Even now, she said it like that. I stared at her. "You lied to them for years," I said quietly. "And you used me to keep the lie alive." Julia flinched. "I know," she whispered. "I know. And I don't expect you to fix it." Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, there was no performance in them, just shame. "I just wanted to ask," she said, voice shaking, "if there's any way you could not hate me." The question hit me harder than any insult, because hate would have been easier. Hate would have been clean. but what I felt was messier. I stared at my coffee for a moment, then back at her. "I don't hate you," I said slowly. "I'm still angry. I probably will be for a long time." Julia nodded, tears gathering. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not the please fix this kind of sorry, the real kind." I didn't understand how much I was taking until everything collapsed. I held her gaze. "You understood enough to call me jealous," I said. "You understood enough to paint me as controlling." She winced. "I know," she said, "and I hate myself for that." The silence between us stretched again, and in that silence, I realized something that surprised me. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel, the revenge fantasy, wasn't here. What was here was something quieter. Freedom. My real victory wasn't Julia suffering. It was me finally living my own life without apology. I took a breath. "Here's what I can offer," I said. Julia looked up quickly, hope flickering. "I won't give you money," I said firmly. "Not now, not a little, not 1 month. If you ask, I'll say no every time." The hope flickered out, but she nodded. "I figured," she whispered. "But," I continued, "if you actually do the work, if you get a real job, if you stop lying, if you're honest with Mom and Dad, I'm willing to talk. I'm willing to have a relationship. As sisters, not as your bank." Julia's eyes filled. "That's more than I deserve," she said. "Probably," I replied quietly, "but I'm offering it anyway." When we stood to leave, she hesitated. "Megan," she said softly, "do you think I can really change?" I stared at her for a long moment. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it. But I learned something important. Change isn't a promise. It's a pattern. "I don't know," I admitted, "but you can try." We walked out separately, and as I walked home, I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge. Closure, slow, imperfect, but real. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's simply stepping out of the role they assigned you, and finally choosing yourself. And if you grew up being told someone else was the golden child, the real question isn't what you do when their crown falls. The real question is this: do you rush in and hold it up again? Or do you finally let them feel the weight of their own choices while you, for the first time, live free? If there's one thing this story proves, it's that the most painful betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who know exactly how to hurt you because they've been watching you stay silent for years. Megan didn't destroy her sister's life. She simply stopped paying for a fantasy that was built on lies, guilt, and a family's obsession with image. And when the truth finally hit the dinner table, it didn't just expose Julia. It exposed a whole system of favoritism that had been crushing Megan quietly since childhood. But what makes this story powerful isn't the revenge, it's the freedom. It's the moment Megan realizes that love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't forgiving too fast. It's choosing yourself for the first time. If you've ever been the one carrying your family, fixing everyone's mess, or being compared to someone else's success, I want you to know you're not alone. Thank you for listening until the end, and if you want more stories that hit hard, heal slowly, and stay with you long after the video ends, please subscribe to Revenge Drama House. Your support keeps these stories alive.